Welcome into this week's On the Spot segment. I'm Tony Mulvey, joined remotely by Joe Antashuk. Joe, how are you doing?
Tony, I'm doing well. How you doing? Happy birthday.
Thank you. I cannot complain. I am, it's another day in paradise. But Joe, some exciting stuff that you've been working on that we've released, I guess, last week. We released this freight sentiment indexes, right? It's kind of these three separate indexes that look at carriers, brokers, and shippers, and kind of their sentiment moving forward. Maybe talk a little bit about like what this is, how we came up with it, kind of that idea behind the sentiment indexes.
Yeah, for sure. So what we did is we surveyed different segments, right? As you mentioned, shippers, brokers, /3PLs, and then carriers. We surveyed each of these groups separately, but we asked them the same series of questions, one about near-term profitability, one about longer-term profitability, and then near-term workforce, longer-term workforce, and business investment, with business investment being sort of how these companies were feeling about investing more money into like newer technologies for the business, right? And the overall scores that we have for each of these segments is an average of the averages for each of those questions, if that makes sense. So we got some interesting results. Sort of importantly to note, everyone is in the positive. Even carriers who have had a relatively tough 2022 still had an overall score of 4.87. It'll be interesting to see how that evolves over time. We're going to survey again at the start of Q1 2023. But right now, things are still holding. It's not apocalyptic.
Yeah, we'll actually pull up that chart that shows the sentiment indexes, right, of all three separately and then the one combined. And I mean, you see there, shippers kind of the most positive outlook, whereas carriers kind of the most negative. I think that coincides with kind of what we've talked about a lot over the past few months. And if you look at our PPI that we release every week, it kind of shows this shift that we've seen from a carrier market to a shipper market. Well, seeing shippers being the most positive and carriers being still technically positive, but maybe the least positive, it kind of coincides with that.
Yeah, and the only metric for any of these segments that was negative was near-term profitability for carriers. So that question is specifically, do you think Q4 2022 will be more profitable than Q3 2022? And so on average, carriers do not think Q4 is going to be more profitable. And they're the only segment that feels that way about Q4.
Yeah, and I think what's cool about this index and all of the indexes is we break it down visually, multiple different ways that can kind of put context around the overall index itself at the top. And one of those charts is this violin chart, and it brings in those 5 key metrics, right, that near-term profitability, and puts it all on the same chart. And it kind of shows the differences in how each segment of transportation is thinking about each one of those questions.
Yeah, exactly. And then if you see on the far right there, the most positive for almost every group, with the exception of carriers, that triangle indicates business investment. So despite sort of market headwinds that, we talk about all the time at FreightWaves, most companies or many of these companies and all the segments still think it's a relatively good time to put more money into new technologies. Maybe it's because of sort of the fluctuation of the market. People think that new technologies will give them more, rapid fire data, so to speak. Business investment, pretty strong category. And then longer term workforce, also strong. And that was the carrier's most positive category. They think that 12 months from now, they're going to be employing more people than they currently are.
Yeah, I guess my question is, like, what were the sizes of these carriers? Because, I could see a situation where some of these bigger carriers can see the small, we talked about the BCO data from Landstar, and you've seen the shift, this rapid decline in BCOs. And we think about that as like this shift of owner operators kind of heading back to become company drivers? I mean, is this just a combination of everybody from a one truck fleet to a mega carrier? Or
It is, yeah. It's an aggregate score of really just anyone who identifies as a carrier, right? So we do have a smaller portion of owner operators and small fleets, and it ranges all the way up to kind of the mega fleets.
Awesome. And we'll bring up
Not a bad idea though to break that down.
Yeah,
I like
we'll bring
that
up
for the future.
one last chart here, and it's one that, to me, at the first glance, it's very busy, but when you understand the underlying answer, like it's every answer from all of the segments plotted on one graph for each of those questions. And I think that you kind of you can see where everybody kind of fits in, right? You've got some people on the far right thinking everything's great, dandy, moving forward with everything. A lot of people right there, right in the middle at that 0 mark. But then you have the kind of spread that gives you the different index values.
Yeah, exactly. And it is interesting. I mean, you look on the right side of that, there are a fair amount of respondents who are saying things are just great, you know. And maybe that's because we have some high achievers tuned into FreightWaves. I'm not really sure.
Awesome stuff, Joe. Where can people go to find these new freight sentiment indexes?
Yeah, so if you just Google freight sentiment, FreightWaves, whatever, it's going to be the first link that pops up there. Go ahead and click on that, and you can see all these charts. There's a link to the story with some analysis that we wrote about it last week also.
Awesome stuff, Joe. Thank you so much for joining me. We will see you next week at F3. Very excited for that. But right now, we'll take a quick break, but we'll be back with more FreightWaves Now.